What does a property manager actually do? So this video, we're going to discuss kind of everything we do from the day you hire us to manage your property all the way through the day the tenant moves out, and we kind of start that process over again. And so the typical owner brings us on when the property's vacant or they're just getting ready to move out, and they're looking for us to lease the property, collect the rent, manage the entire process, and be the point of contact for maintenance, anything while that owner is out of the state, out of country, and we handle everything. And so I can walk you through each of those things we do. Um, there's also times where we kind of take over leases and manage it mid-lease, and that's kind of the same situation where the owner maybe is dealing with the tenant and collecting rent, and they need somebody to kind of jump in and be that middleman. And so, but we can kind of start this process anywhere through this cycle. But for this video, we're going to kind of talk about from the beginning, you're moving out, all the way to the tenant moves out and we release that property again. And so the way it kind of works for us is an owner says, "Hey, I'm looking for a property manager. What does my house rent for?" We'll run numbers using a few different tools, check, Zillow, other things, rent range, those types of things, and look at what properties you're renting for and give you an idea of, hey, we believe your property can rent for X. Come out, look at the property, do a walk through the property, and verify the condition of that property kind of meets what we're looking for. If we go through that property and we're looking at it and we're seeing, hey, this might need some paint, maybe there's a lot of pink walls or blue walls or red walls, we're going to make recommendations to get the property as neutral as possible. Um, and so that's the first step is we're going to look at kind of the turnover from you to get the property lease ready and move in ready. So that typically includes maybe some paint, definitely a cleaning, and then any miscellaneous repairs we find out throughout the property. So another thing we're gonna have to look at is the rental license. And so what repairs or what stuff's going to need to be done to this property to make sure it passes a rental license. In Washington, D.C., that's called the basic business license. In Howard County, it's just a rental license. What you're looking for there is any safety, fire hazard stuff like that, handrails on all the stairs, smoke detectors, CO detectors, screens, no pilling paint, no holes in the wall, that kind of stuff. So, typical stuff. But a lot of times what we find is an owner occupied property going from a rental to a rental might not have the appropriate handrails or might be missing, double keyed locks is one we find where you can lock it from inside outside. You know, in any rental property, that needs to be a thumb latch on the inside, just for safety, fire hazard, that type of stuff. So we'll go through, make a list of that. We'll get bids for any work that needs to be done. We have vendors that can handle all that turnover, and we'll give you bids for that and say, hey, once the property's vacant, we can get in, get it painted, get new carpet, get it cleaned, do the smoke detectors, do the locks, and have that property ready to go on the market within a week or whatever that is, right? So that's number one, is we're gonna handle the turnover for you, and we'll get bids so you can see those numbers. If it's something that is pretty simple, we can do some of that stuff in house, like changing the locks. One thing we do want to do is we want to change the locks between any occupancy. So even though you as the owner are moving out and you give us keys, we want to change those locks just for liability purpose of knowing who has those keys. So we'll put new locks on that. And as you see in other videos that we have, we recommend the quick set locks because you can change that really easily. It's a little bit more expensive than a typical lock change, a couple dollars, nothing crazy. And then after every occupancy, you can change those for really no cost. It's basically you can change from this key to this key in about 30 seconds per lock, and it's going to save you a lot of money as you deal with those every turnover. And then again, that gives you us. We know that only we have the key and the tenant has the key, and then between every tenancy, we'll change those. So that's first thing, turnover, right? And then second thing is we're gonna start marketing the property. So we'll come out, we'll take a bunch of pictures of the property, we'll do a 360 tour, we'll do a video tour, anything we need to do to get that property on the market as quick as possible to document the condition of it and start attracting leads, right? So we'll place that on our website, and our website through software, it syndicates to Zillow, HotPads, Trulia, rentals, 50, 60 different websites it kind of pushes to. And the goal there is to get it out, and then people start calling us through those websites, start emailing us through those websites, start scheduling showings. So we'll be available Monday through Saturday, through a certain amount of time where we can go and show the property. We do all of our showings in-house, and so we will meet the potential tenant, open the door for them, let them kind of walk through, ask us any questions, and if they like the property, we'll give them the information to apply. Um, And so a typical property, we're going to show it 4, 5, 6 times, get a few applications, and depending on what the applications are, if there's one that's approved, we're kind of looking for 6 different things. Do they make 2.5 times the rent, or have a voucher or something that covers the rent? Do they have good credit? We're going to verify their income. We're going to verify their renter history. We're going to check their criminal record. So we're going to do all of this for you. And then once we have somebody that says, hey, these guys, once we look at it and say, hey, these guys actually look good, they're approved, based on what we see, they should be good tenants. We will then approve these tenants. The next step would be to have them sign the lease and pay the security deposit. So we're going to then collect that. The security deposit is equal to 1 month's rent. That's for both DC and Howard County. In Howard County, there's a couple circumstances where you can do 2 times rent, but that's very rare. And so typically it's 1 time's rent. So we're going to then collect the security deposit, sign the lease, and then we're going to take the property off the market. At this time, we know they're going to be moving in 15, 20, 30 days, whatever that is. And we have that agreed. Once that's done, we're going to then go back to the property and just make sure everything's done, do another move-in inspection, document the way the condition of the property, make sure it's clean. We've had some showings, we've had some people in and out of there. We want to do a hard surface cleaning, mow the lawn if that needs to be done, but basically get it ready to, when these tenants move in on the first of the month, that it's move-in ready. There's no issues, there's no concerns. The lawn's mowed, the trash bins are empty, utilities are in the tenant's name, all these types of things. And so once that's done and the tenant moves in, we're going to then exchange keys for first month's rent. And so now the property's occupied. We've collected first month's rent. We have a deposit. We have a signed lease. The property's been turned over correctly. It's move-in ready. We then give those tenants 2 weeks for them to kind of document the condition, right? The security deposit is contingent on how we gave the property to the tenant and how the tenant gave it back to us when they move out. And a lot of times in the past, we used to go through those with those tenants, the day before or the day of moving in and walk the property and say, hey, we've got this here, we've got this light, everything's good here. Oh, but there's a little nick here, or the stove has a little chip in it, and we would document those. And that can be time consuming, but you also kind of feel rushed because the tenants want to move in. As property managers, we have other things we're trying to do, whether it's maintenance or showing other properties, that kind of stuff. And so it's one of those things where it's rushed. So what we do is we give the tenants 2 weeks to document anything they see in the property. And what we found is this helps them have more time, not feel rushed. Think about when you buy a brand new car or even a used car, especially, and everything looks good that you buy it, whatever. And then the first time you wash it, you go through and you're like, oh, I didn't realize there's a little nick here or a little scratch here or a dent here. So the 2 weeks give those tenants a little more time to kind of document that. And then within 2 weeks, they're going to send us that list, say, hey, here's the 4 things I saw. We'll note those and be like, yep, we agree with those, or we didn't notice those on the move-in. Let me find a picture. But there's the documentation the first 2 weeks. In that meantime, we've done a video of the property. We've walked the property. We've videoed everything. We've taken 100, 200 photos, depending on the size of the property. And we know the condition we gave to the tenants. And then this last 2 weeks just kind of finalizes it. And so now when the tenant moves out in, hopefully 5 years, 6, 7 years, we can compare that move-in photo, move-in video, and their information they sent us to the condition they gave it back to us. And we expect it in, similar condition minus wear and tear. If they live there 7 years, yes, it's going to need paint. It probably needs carpet, but there shouldn't be a hole in the ceiling. The light shouldn't be broken. Those type of things we want to make sure the tenants take care of. All right, so once the tenant now moves in, it's been 2 weeks. We have now collected first month's rent. And on the 10th of that month, we are going to send you the rent minus management fees. And then we also hold a maintenance reserve that for every property, about $300. So we're going to send you first month's rent minus management fees minus the $300. And that is now your first month's rent. So every month after this, you should be expecting rent minus management fees. And then if there's any maintenance. Now, if the tenant moves in mid-month, let's say they move in on the 15th of the month, it's very similar. We're still going to take first month's rent up front, and then we're going to prorate the second month. So on the 15th of the month, we're going to take the full rent. We're going to pay our management fees. We're going to fund your maintenance reserve, send you the balance. Now, the second month, they're going to pay 15 days. So you're going to see a smaller check the second month. So what I always tell owners is, hey, by that third month is when you should start expecting to see rent minus management fees. And then if there's maintenance, we'll deal with it. But before that even happens, you should know the condition of the property. We know the condition of the property. We should have a pretty good expectation every month of what maintenance should come up if there is any, if there is going to be anything. Another thing we kind of see is when tenants do move in, we call it the nesting period. They are going to kind of notify us about things that maybe if you lived there, you weren't too worried about, like maybe a squeaky door to the garage that every time they open it, it squeaks. And they're going to say, "Hey, I need this fixed." And you might be like, as the owner, we dealt with that for 10 years, or they just need to go get some WD-40 and spray that on there. We view it as good information. The tenant's updating us, and so we want to get out there and take care of that. And what that does, that shows the tenant that you care about the property. You're going to take care of maintenance if they call us for it. And then after about 2-3 weeks of that, they kind of realize that, hey, everything's fixed, everything's good, and then they'll update us if something happens down the road. But if the property was taken care of, if we gave them a good property, maintenance should be pretty minimal, minus things that are going to happen. HVAC goes out, 10 years. Hot water heaters have issues, appliances have issues. And so what we recommend to owners, if the property is in good shape, is to kind of expect about a 10% expense there throughout the life of the lease, or each year for that, for maintenance to be spent, whether it's gutter cleaning, appliances like we talked about, but some of these systems. And that's kind of a good rule of thumb, unless the property is a little bit older and your systems are older and the HVAC is kind of on its last leg, or the washer and dryer have had some issues, so that kind of stuff comes into play. So the next thing we're going to do is, now we're just collecting rent each month. We're handling any tenant issues. Maybe there's a neighbor issue. Recently we had one where a new tenant moved in and they have a couple young kids, and these young kids seem to, maybe they have some free time outside, and so we've had some neighbor call and complain about the kids. And it's nothing too crazy, but we'll call the tenant and say, "Hey, just so you know, the neighbors have called us, said your kids are, in their yard, or they're harassing their dog, or whatever it is." And so we will deal with that. We'll call those tenants. We're never going to call you as the owner about that. That's something we're just going to deal with, because it's pretty simple. It's just, passing on the information. Um, Fortunately, we don't get a lot of that, of neighbors calling us, but if we do, we'll deal with that. Another thing we want to make sure is the tenants have the utilities all in their name, and so that's something we'll check on and make sure that's done. And the next thing is, we're kind of just waiting for, we're dealing with any maintenance that happens, as rent, and if that happens, we'll collect that, we'll handle that, we'll troubleshoot that over the phone with the tenant. If it's something that needs to be taken care of, we'll update you. Hey, the tenant called about a microwave not working. We're going to send a vendor out, so we'll keep you posted on that. We'll do all the work to get that done. Hopefully it's a simple repair. If it's not, we'll let you know that, hey, we need to replace this microwave. It's going to cost X. So you can kind of plan for that and prepare for that. Another thing we're going to be doing through the life of the lease is, we want to do property walkthroughs, especially the early lease, a new tenant, every 90 days, which for some people that can seem like a lot. But what we have found is, getting into the properties every 90 days, 3 months, a lot of things can happen in 3 months. And we've seen properties we've taken over from other property management companies that don't do this, that haven't been in the property for 3, 4, 5, 6 years, and the owner has no idea the condition of the property. And so by doing this every 90 days, the tenants know we're coming. It helps them know that we're going to come check stuff. It keeps them on their toes a little bit. They also like it. Most tenants also like it, because they can say, "Hey, there's a doorknob I need you to fix," or, "Hey, there's a garage door that squeaked. Can you take care of this?" So while we're there, we can do some of those little things that the tenants feel has value. And then for you, you're getting pictures of the property every 90 days, or 180, depending on the package. But what it does is, it gives you eyes in the property. It gives the tenant that information. They know we're coming, so they kind of take care of the property better. And for us, it's a really good way to document and also handle any potential large lease issues, large violations that could happen. Like maybe somebody's been living there that shouldn't be living there, or they have a pet they shouldn't have. We can kind of catch those pretty early, and update the tenant that, hey, this needs to be fixed right now, rather than a year later realizing they had a dog in there that maybe has destroyed the baseboards, or dug a bunch of holes in the backyard, that now we're looking at the expensive cost plus lease violation and dealing with it. So we can kind of catch things early. The other things we're dealing with is like any city violations. We get notices from cities that maybe trash is being left in the curb, or trash cans aren't being taken care of right, especially in DC. Somebody drops drop some trash in the front of your yard and now it's your responsibility. So that kind of stuff we deal with. And again, we're going to deal with that. We're going to not really involve you in that. That's something we just kind of handle. We'll reach out to the tenants, find out what's going on, or we'll send somebody out there and pick it up, take care of it. And then, now we're 6 months, 7 months, 8 months into the lease. We now need to start thinking about lease renewals and what's the next step. And so this is when we're going to reach out to you, usually 90 days before that lease ends. We're going to reach out to you and say, hey, the tenant's doing great. The market's pretty stagnant, or the market's done this, the market's done this, and we're going to make a recommendation of, hey, we think the rent should go here, or the tenants have been fantastic, or maybe the tenants have been kind of a pain in the butt, and it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world if they decide to move out. So let's maybe raise their rent 10%, because these guys have been difficult and they aren't taking care of the property as well as we want. So maybe if we increase the rent, at least we're being compensated for that. And so that's what we'll look to do 60 to 90 days before that lease ends. Once we agree on that, we'll reach out to the tenant, say, hey, here's what the owner's doing. We're going to raise the rent 8% because of X, Y, and Z. Tenant agrees, or tenant says, hey, I'm going to move out. Great. If the tenant moves out, we will go kind of back through this process. We're going to document what the condition looks like. We'll get turnover. We'll get an idea of what it should rent for, and we'll get it turned over and back on the market and release it. If the tenant says, hey, I'm going to stay, yeah, sounds good, I love the place, let me re-sign that lease. We now have these tenants in place for another year. Also, the tenant can say, hey, I'm month to month. I'm looking to I might be getting transferred. Can I stay month to month? At that point, we'll reach back out to you and say, yeah, we'll do month to month, but maybe we want a little premium for that because the uncertainty of when you're going to move out. So yeah, we can do that, but we want to add an extra $50 a month for a month-to-month fee or something like that. So that's another thing we do. And then that's kind of the life of it. Tenant moves in, collect the rent. We send you that rent on the 10th minus any maintenance or management fees. And then we just handle all the day-to-day, anything that come up. And it's funny because sometimes nothing happens, like it's really quiet. And then all of a sudden you get a call that, there's a roof leak, or a tree fell on the car across the street and maybe hit the tenant's car. And, all these things that it's hard to think of all the random things that happen that we kind of get drug into on a daily basis. Right now in DC, there's a lot of the lead pipe replacement happening, and so that stuff we facilitate and coordinate with the tenants that we don't need to involve you on, because it's really nothing that's costing you anything. It's just more of updating and keeping everybody posted. Each month we collect the water bills to verify the tenant's paying them. If they're not, we update, reach out to the tenant, say, hey, you haven't paid the water bill, get this paid. We're making sure, the first to the fifth has rent been collected. Why is the tenant not paying? Is it normal for them to pay on the fourth or the fifth? Or if they're paying on the eighth, what's going on? So we'll be in contact with the tenant, finding out what's going on. We'll be collecting late fees. If it's a common occurrence, we might recommend, hey, let's start the eviction. If it's something that maybe happened because maybe they did have, a real story where there's some issues, they'll usually update us and let us know. At that point, we'll update you and say, hey, the tenant reached out. They said rent's going to be late because of this reason. If that's a valid reason, we still want to make sure we document and have everything ready to go to maybe send them a 10-day notice to pay or quit. Because the key is, even if it's an unfortunate situation and maybe the tenant has had some issues, we want to make sure we're following the lease in case we get to a position where we need to actually do the eviction. We want to make sure we're doing that as quick as possible and not wasting time, because time is money. The biggest thing for a landlord, an owner, is missed rent, whether it's from non-payment of rent or vacancy. That you can't make up. Missed rent, maybe you can collect back from the tenant, but with late fees, that kind of stuff, and the late fees are very minimal. So, but that's kind of the life of what we do in property management. It's every day is different. It's very interesting. We manage about 300 single families in Howard County, Maryland. We also manage a couple hundred HOAs, and we have a team of, I think there's 9 of us. From 2 maintenance coordinators to a handyman to 2 property managers to an accountant to multiple assistants to business development manager. And every day is different. The amount of phone calls we get about just something else that can happen. The neighbor's dog, is biting people, or stuff like that. And we got to handle those phone calls and deal with it and determine what we need to do. And typically it's nothing. Sometimes there's nothing we need to do, but we got to still answer that phone call, listen to the tenants, we don't involve you in that kind of stuff. We just handle it. But every day is different. From a flooded basement one day to a leaking roof the next day to no issues the next day. And so so our thing is we want to be that middle person for you, so you don't have to deal with that call, especially if it's something that's really not that big of a deal. But then when it is, at 2 a.m., basement flooding, we're there, we're ready. We have guys that can get out there and stop the situation from getting worse and then start working to get the property fixed rather than you having to get up, figure out who you're going to call, get over there, figure out how to handle it. We have systems for it. This is what we do on a daily basis. We're used to it, and we can save you a lot there. So, in my opinion, the cost of property management being 8.9% for us to be there in case of all of this, plus all the other things we do with the systems we have involved to collect rent, to start the evictions correctly, connections with attorneys, to handle maintenance, to handle lease violations, to handle anything with the city. It's to me, it's pretty inexpensive. It's what, a cup of coffee a day, everybody says. um, and it really is worth it to have us there for you, for peace of mind for you. And that's the goal, is that we're doing everything for you. You're not involved in this, and so you can focus on family, work, whatever it is you like to do, and not be bothered by it. So you own the house, you own the rental, but we own the problem. We'll take care of that for you. So hopefully this helps. I know it's got a long rambling, a lot of different things, but that's looking at what the life is from beginning to end, of move in to move out. But again, anywhere along that line, if you have a property you need help with, whether a tenant's not paying rent, or you got maintenance that's maybe kind of becoming overwhelming, or you have vendors that you're having a hard time coordinating with, reach out to us. That's what we do. We can help. We can manage. Again, we charge 8.9 to 12.9% of collected rent, kind of depending on what service you're looking for. But we can handle it all for you.